Hello, my name is Paul LeBlanc, and today I will be giving a presentation on prompting and prompt hierarchy. So let's begin. So what is a prompt? Well, a prompt is a supplemental cue that is presented after the initial instruction that helps the learner make a correct response. So in other words, it is a supplemental action that you might give after the SD is presented, or what we call the initial instruction on the slide. You'll use this to teach new skills, especially in the case with most to least prompting, where you want to interrupt the learner with an intrusive prompt to help ensure that they get the correct response so that you can reinforce it. And you can systematically fade those prompts as they become more and more independent. A little more on that later. The prompt helps us guide the learner to a correct response. And it's faded as the learner becomes increasingly independent, as I kind of touched on momentarily. So let's talk about prompt hierarchies. So a hierarchy in general is something that organizes things from least to greatest in value. So a prompt hierarchy organizes the prompts in order of least to most intrusive. You can think of intrusiveness as how helpful you're being with your prompts. So the more help you are giving to the learner, the more intrusive your prompt is. So we always try to use only the level of intrusiveness that the learner needs to succeed, because our goal is to fade the prompts to promote independence. It's not possible to promote independence if you're giving more help than the learner needs. And that's why we use prompt hierarchies, so we can systematically fade them in the case of most to least prompting when we're teaching a new skill. Or if we're reviewing a skill that the learner should already have, we want to make sure we're not being too intrusive. We don't want them to over rely on us. Of course, we always want to encourage that independence. So in that case, we will use least to most prompting, where we'll use a less intrusive prompt and become more intrusive until we figure out right exactly where the level of help that they need in order to succeed. And then we can fade it back once again and get them back to mastery of that skill. So if you look here, this is the visual aid that was provided in the assignment sheet. I couldn't find a better one myself. We're going to be referencing this as we go through examples of each of the 6 major types of prompts. I'm going to be going in order from most to least prompting, because that's how I most often approach prompt hierarchies. It's usually when I am teaching a new skill to a learner that I take these into consideration. So to begin with, the most intrusive is a full physical prompt. It doesn't get much more intrusive than basically touching your learner and physically moving them so that they can perform the desired action. So an example of a full physical prompt would be if you're teaching your learner to communicate using some kind of augmented communication. Maybe you have an iPad with a software on it that enables artificial speech. You would tell them, say I want, or say cookie, and you would physically grab their hand and move it to that position on the iPad that would enable that iPad to make the sound. So that's an example of a full physical prompt for speech. Now let's move to the next most intrusive. We're fading just a little bit to a partial physical. So let's say your student or your learner has successfully learned how to consistently communicate using a full physical prompt, which probably will happen very quickly since you're basically doing it for them. Now you can wean off of that intrusiveness by being partial physical. Maybe instead of grabbing their hand and physically moving them the whole way, you might grab them somewhere higher up and allow them just kind of guide their hand in the direction of the iPad and let them choose the position on the iPad for the correct input. And that would be an example of a partial physical prompt. Again, you're still touching the learner, but they are not, you're not doing the whole action completely for them. So the next prompt that would be one step less intrusive is a modeling prompt. So this one is pretty self-explanatory. To do a modeling prompt, you're going to, in the example we had, we're going to do the action for them. So in this case, it would be have the iPad, you would present the SD or the initial instruction, and you would say cookie, like I did before. And then you will show them, you will grab the iPad and you will touch the input that says cookie on the iPad. Then you give the learner an opportunity to mimic that action and press that same input, resulting in the same consequence, the iPad saying cookie. Moving on to the next prompt would be a gestural prompt. So a gestural prompt is when you gesticulate, you use your fingers or sometimes even your gaze to indicate what you want them to do, give them a subtle hint, much less intrusive than a modeling prompt. So in this example, I would say to the student, my SD would be say cookie, and then I would point on the screen to the input that I wanted them to select, the one that causes the iPad to say cookie. And hopefully the student would respond, or the learner would respond and touch that same input that I gestured to. And they'll have the same consequence as the modeling prompt. And so we're going to continue to fade, and we're going to move on to a verbal prompt. So there are different ways to do a verbal prompt, but what they all have in common is that you're using your voice to give some kind of an instruction. So in this case, the SD would be say cookie, and then I might give them a directive. I would say, now touch the icon that has a cookie on it. Or it could be something simpler, just touch the icon. And they touch it, and if they touch the correct one, the iPad says cookie, and we've successfully used a verbal prompt to assist the client in making the correct action. So let's fade to the sixth and final, the least intrusive of all the prompts would be a visual prompt. So if we, when you're using a visual prompt, you're going to try to modify the stimuli in the environment that you want them to interact with. In this case, in the iPad, maybe what I could do is I have the iPad set up, and there is a series of things that they could select. One of them is the target, which in this example has been cookie. I might make that icon a little bit larger than the other ones to make it a little bit more appealing for them to touch. It's like a subtle hint that's visual, but there are no vocal cues or any auditory cues going along with that. It's purely physical, and I'm not touching the client or gesturing towards what I want them to touch. So hopefully by saying touch cookie, and they see that that one logo is a lot larger than the other ones in the field on the screen, then they will touch that one. And if they do, we have successfully used a visual prompt in order to help them get the correct response. And so that is how we would wean our kid all the way from a full physical level of prompting, the most intrusive, all the way to the least intrusive. And hopefully by this point, if you're doing a visual prompt, you can gradually fade how dramatic your visual prompt is until it's the same size as the other ones in the field. And if they can respond to touch cookie the way that they you would expect, the target response, and they touch the iPad and it says cookie, then they have now responded independently. And we have faded and gone through the entire prompt hierarchy. And here, leave on the screen for a few moments are my references to that were given in the assignment, and one that I found using the database through Ball State. Thank you for watching my presentation, and have a good day.